Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time now for the Violet Hour with your host, Christopher DiRaddo.
Merci beaucoup. Hello everyone, bonjour. My name is Chris. Bienvenue au Violet Hour. Violet Hour a débuté en 2014 pour soutenir les écrivains et écrivaines du LGBTQ qui vivent à Montréal et à travers le pays, ainsi que présenter leur travail à des nouveaux publics. À l'époque, nous avons peu d'invitations de monter sur la scène pour la lecture. Cela a bien sûr changé au fil des années avec des événements comme celui-ci et tout le travail de fierté littéraire. Donc, je vais prendre un moment pour remercier Denis Martin, Claude et toute l'équipe pour leur travail acharné pour promouvoir la littérature du LGBTQ. Thank you very much. To date, more than 200 writers have taken to the stage at Violet Hour events. We also have a monthly book club where we read classic and contemporary works of queer literature. Our next book club selection is Tomboy's Survival Guide by Ivan Coyote, and we'll be gathering on March 4th at the Archives Gays du Québec to discuss the book. So if you want to be part of a book club, come see me afterwards. I have a newsletter, and you can sign up for it. This afternoon, we have 4 readers for you, each of who will be reading in English. We'll be hearing from Michael Belcher, Jane Walsh, Russell Brooks, and Peter Dube. So we're going to start off with our first reader. Michael, I'm going to ask you to come up to the stage. Please give him a round of applause. Michael Belcher is a writer, an educator living in Montreal, Quebec. He received an honors BA in Cultural Studies from McGill University and completed his MA in English Lit at Concordia in 2012. That same year, he directed his play Between Night and Day at Mainline Theatre, which was voted a top 10 play in Montreal Mirror's Readers' Poll. Michael currently teaches creative arts, media studies, and English Lit at College LaSalle. His book and film reviews have been published in Matrix Magazine and with the Imagination Film Festival, and he was a finalist in the Fiddleheads 2021 Fiction Contest. He is currently working on his second novel. Michael's also a big part of the Violet Hour book club, a great presence. And I'm curious, Michael, is this an exciting time for LGBTQ literature for you? Do you feel like part of a community?
100%, both globally, but also just here in Montreal. I mean, I love being part of the book club and kind of expanding my knowledge of all of these books. The same thing happens with Imagination Film Festival and kind of exploring the world of queer either literature or film. And what I love is that there's just so many more voices and so many more ways to come at the queer experience. So I find it to be fascinating.
Well, I look forward to hearing from you read. Over to you, Michael.
All right, so I'm going to read a part. So my first novel is unpublished. I'm shopping it around. And the novel is called Difficult Bodies. And I like to, in the novel, I'm exploring the kind of intersection between body image and morality. And one of those moralities is around the concept of infidelity. So you'll see this piece kind of deals with that just a bit. So just the background is that the character who speaks in the first person, his name is Joey, and he is with someone named Tommy, and you'll see here that he meets someone named Pierre. The Pierre Age. December 2003 to undetermined. It starts with a quote. Poets and painters alike have always had the right to take liberties of any kind. Horace. In Rome, it was a common occurrence. One emperor's head switched for another. A torso scraped to a successor's leaner dimensions. Just as in ancient Egypt, where Ramses II added his name to pre-existing inscriptions, so they would glorify his achievements. During the Byzantine, Christians defaced statues to dispel pagan demons. A cross cut into the forehead of Aphrodite. There are so many ways to tell a new story with what remains of the old. Drag show confetti swept, the stage had become a dance floor. It was nearly Christmas, so Cabaret Mado, on the graying outskirts of the village, was dressed in garland and penis lights. Pierre's face sliced towards me from where he danced with his friends, eager, friendly. I looked at my hand, expecting a wedding ring, ready to hide it and let the flirtation play out, fizzle out, as it always did, moving away from prospects before they moved in. No harm to Tommy. But as the dance floor shifted, Pierre and I rotated around one another like spinning tops, aware at all times of one another's forms, Pierre's coquettish smile carving the space between. Pierre's shoes were impossibly white, as if they had never been worn, so I had no trouble finding him after I'd shaken my head to some pulsing beat. Each shift and each spin bringing us closer together, and like a shock, I felt Pierre's hand brush against mine. A light touch, my whole body tingling in afterglow. When I looked down at my hand and back up to find Pierre, I was already a step or two away, within grasping distance, but far enough away to allow me a choice. Interested or pass? I knew I should pass, that I had to pass, but I opened my body slightly towards Pierre's to continue to dangle the possibility. The speakers commanded, slam it to the left, shake it to the right, and the dance floor obliged, Pierre brushing up against the occasional stranger, but giving his attention to none of them, no one but me. Needing an excuse to disavow the link I'd encouraged, my bladder gave me one. I turned towards my friend Aaron to alert him about my bathroom break, but he was nowhere to be found. I scanned the club, casually at first, then frantically, feeling like a mother whose child has wandered away in the grocery store. I need not have worried. Aaron was by the bar, locked in an embrace with a tall, balding Latino man. I smiled and stepped down off the platform. I willed my bladder to cooperate and think of other, more solid things. It was the white of his shoes that revealed Pierre first. He was directly in front of me in line. Somehow, in scanning the club for Aaron, I'd missed Pierre's departure, mere moments before my own. And now my appearance would seem deliberate. Should I turn around and go back upstairs? Should I just ignore the boy I'd been flirting with, whose hand I'd brushed, sending tingles? There was no time to answer. Pierre swiveled around to look at what? To find me? And the sight of me split his being in two, pouring forth light. Salut, ça va? He asked. Salut, yeah, you? Pierre laughed an open, explosive laugh and switched to English. Want some? I looked down at his hand. He was holding a shiny hip flask, a gold that flashed teal in certain light, chaining draped like swag around its neck. Is it something? Vodka, Pierre said, allaying my hesitation over other substances. 1 drop for 2 of Red Bull. The way he pronounced the drink, Bull, was adorable. His lips pushed out. I'm putting myself through med school, pennies pinching. Here was a stranger offering me a prohibited alcoholic beverage that I had not seen poured or mixed, what could have been a crushed-up pill inside, or a roofie perhaps. All signs pointed to, sure, yeah, I said. Voila, he said. I took the flask and tipped it towards my mouth. Most of the mix hit my throat, but some dribbled down my chin, and I pulled the flask quickly away. Pierre doubled over with laughter, that unbridled laugh, balancing himself with a hand faintly placed at my back. Apparently it's my first time at the rodeo, I said. An obscure reference, perhaps, for a francophone, and I stumbled towards a qualifier. Yee-haw, mister, Pierre chuckled before I needed to. A bouncer rounded the corner from some back room, and Pierre nabbed the flask from my hand and smoothly slid it into the crotch of his pants. The bouncer approached, eyeing me, wiping my mouth, but muscled past without comment. That's Maurice, Pierre said. He's sweet until he isn't. Pierre pulled the flask from his pants, lifted it in cheers, and took a draught before tucking it into his tube sock. He winked. Not into tubular socks, but it does the trick. We talked while the line slowly shortened, who our friends were, how often we came to Mado. When the subject of the TV show Ally McBeal came up, we had enough fodder to last us straight to the urinals, peeing beside one another, staring forward until simultaneously we looked at one another and scrunched up our noses. The restroom smelled like stale water and sourpuss shooters. The 2 hours until closing were a distortion of mirth, Alan Beale references, and moving bodies. Next to one another, pressed together with lips almost touching. Pierre didn't return to his friends, and I didn't try to find Aaron. Every 20 minutes or so, we would return to the bathroom, which, as the night progressed, began to have no line at all. We would share a stall, and Pierre would remove the flask from where he kept it in his tubular sock. When did I first know I'd be sleeping with Pierre? Was it the way he looked at me, with all that built-up lust bubbling over the edges? When he split open, pouring forth light? Had I been aware, or it had snuck up on me, a stealthy, mindless sin? We snuck through the basement entrance, believing, with dulled senses, that we were the ones who were stealthy. Pierre's oversized tan and blue parka swishing, my teeth chattering in pantomime, Pierre rubbing my arms to warm me up from the December freeze, a whole drunken production. Regardless, no one made a peep from above. Was with Pierre for more than 4 months and never saw his parents once. Never even saw the upstairs. Never saw Pierre lighting a series of candles, appearing in that little capsule of a room like a vigilant night watchman, illuminating his face that cuts through space and chatter when it finds you in the room. Was that why I was suddenly on top of him, pulling his shirt off, or was it all just carpe diem? Falling onto Pierre's bed in a heap of half-removed clothing, the vodka still on his tongue, the sweetness of Red Bull on his breath. 2 snowflakes on his hip, captured at the moment of disintegration, their stiff intricacies loosing into snow dust. On Pierre's dresser, a vase of week-old snapdragons, breathing the irresistible perfume of decline, softly wilted at the edges of each mouth, which salivated with candlelight. Fleur fanée, Pierre said. The taste of his sweat, its rubbery tang stinging my tongue, falling asleep with fingers in his not-quite curls. The next morning, I was in Pierre's ensuite bathroom, its surfaces entirely tessellated. The simple fact of it would have been enough to dizzy me, that bathroom, me in it, but my hangover and the repeating shades of blue and gray were too much, and I needed to sit on the toilet seat to gain balance. A pink devil duck bath toy sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at me with dead, rubbery eyes. I felt nothing. No remorse, no sense of impending damnation, only unpleasant exhaustion and the slight, ever so fluttery, down deep inclination to smile at the duck's absurdity. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Our next reader is Jane Walsh. Come on up, Jane. Let's give her a round of applause. Jane is a queer historical romance novelist who loves everything Regency. She's delighted to have the opportunity to put her studies in history and costume design to good use by writing love stories. She owes a great debt of gratitude to the local coffee shop for fueling her novel writing endeavors. Jane's happily ever after is centered on her wife and their cat in their cozy home together in Canada. I am so happy to have you on a physical stage for the first time. So I've known Jane a very long time. Her first book came out just as the pandemic was hitting. And so it's never really read on stage in Montreal. And her 4th book is coming out in...
My 4th book came out in August.
Okay, and your 5th book is coming out then.
My 5th book is coming out in May.
Okay, so very happy to have you on finally on the Violet Hour stage. So over to you, Jane.
Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Jane Walsh. I'm a queer Regency romance author. So if you've enjoyed watching Bridgerton on Netflix, but you wished it was a lot more sapphic, then I hope you would enjoy my books. Today I'm reading from The Inconvenient Heiress, which is my 4th book, and the first in my new series, The Spinsters of Inverleigh. The series is about a group of friends in a British seaside resort town in the early 1800s. So The Inconvenient Heiress is a friends to lovers, rags to riches Regency romp. And it's about two best friends, Caroline and Arabella, who have to now adjust to high society after one of them discovers that she's actually a wealthy heiress instead of a poor nobody, as she's always thought. But they keep getting distracted by each other's charms. So I'm reading from the first chapter. Caroline Reeve hadn't been born with a head for figures. She felt the pain of it every time she sat down with the household ledger and tried to justify a joint of beef for dinner instead of another night of pigeon pie. She thumbed open the thick book, her temples aching when she saw last week's tally of what she owed to the grocer. It was difficult to economize in a family of 6, and finding new ways to squeeze their savings was an endless task. What little money Papa had left them seemed to slip through her grasp faster than a fistful of sand. She blew out a sigh and picked up her pen with the gravity of a judge. It was never any use to run away from the facts. Will had spilled ink all over his Sunday trousers, so now she needed to find enough coin for new ink and new clothes, or she could never show her face in front of the vicar again. Reverend Thompson was good enough to tutor her brothers without charging for the lessons, but she couldn't have them showing up to church full of stains after all his help. Giggles and the clicking of shoes announced the presence of her 2 sisters before they bounced into the room. Betsy was tall and slender, with a mass of brown curls framing her cheeks. And Susan was short with dark blonde hair that she was fond of arranging into intricate braids. The pair of them were inclined to model their looks after naughty milkmaids, hiking their skirts as high as they could manage without appearing completely brazen. "Caro, darling Caro, we're going out," Betsy announced, tying her straw bonnet beneath her chin with a bright purple ribbon that Caroline couldn't recall paying for. She hoped it hadn't been begged from a suitor. Her pride was hanging by a shred among the shopkeepers, and she couldn't bear it if they thought her sisters shameless on top of it all. Susan peered over her shoulder and wrinkled her nose. "Figures again, Caro? Do you not do anything fun anymore?" Caroline tugged one of her braids. "Not unless we wish to live on scraps of butter spread on crumbs of bread." Susan sighed and moved away. "You worry too much. Everything's all right these days. The Reeve family is doing fine." "Because I take care of it all." But Caroline bit back the words. "Heading to the shore, are you?" "To town, of course. Town is ever so much more interesting than the boring old sea." Betsy fluffed her curls, and she and Susan dissolved into giggles again. Once visitors started to arrive from London for the summer, their attitude would change, and Caroline would hear nothing from dawn to dusk but rapturous praise for the endless diversions of the seaside. "Stay out of trouble," she told them, "and be home in time for dinner. Above all, behave like a lady." The door slammed shut before she finished admonishing them, but it was nothing they hadn't heard from her before. Betsy was the second eldest Reeve at 23, and Susan was but a scant 14 months behind her. Either of them ought to be helping more with the accounts and the household chores, but it didn't matter how old her siblings were. Caroline would always be the eldest, and she couldn't bring herself to burden her family with the responsibilities that were her duty to shoulder as best she could. After all, she had made a promise. She slumped over the ledger and tried not to be envious of a trip to town that she didn't even want. She wasn't young enough to be distracted from her problems by ribbons, and she had never been interested in making eyes at the local lads. A half hour and a page of scrawled numbers later, Caroline pushed the ledger away. It was mid-afternoon on Wednesday, after all, which was her favorite time of the week. In fact, she rose to her toes and peered out the kitchen window to be rewarded with the sight of Arabella Seton ducking into her brother's house next door, right on time. "I'm afraid the tea isn't fresh," Caroline called out when she heard the front door creak open, though she wasn't worried that Arabella would turn up her nose. It was all too common for her to be offered twice or thrice steeped tea in the Reeve household. Arabella wandered into the kitchen. She wasn't a woman who rushed, moving at the slow pace of life in Inverleigh, as if not only her head but her whole body was in the clouds far above. She was a dreamer, as optimistic as could be, and Caroline's very best friend. She was short and soft and comfortably plump all over, without an angle to be found on her anywhere, and Caroline had looked. Her spectacles perched on her snub nose, Her round cheeks, the color and shape of a ripe peach, flushed at the slightest attention, provocation, or surprise. And her elbows and wrists had little dimples in them where the bend was, instead of sharp bone. Even her honey brown curls were short and full, bouncing around her face under her bonnet. Caroline preferred to think of her as adorable or sweet, both of which she was in spades. After all, Arabella wouldn't be interested, and Caroline had sworn off the idea of any kind of dalliance with anyone who lived in Inverleigh, sticking to uncomplicated affairs with visitors' companions or fellow spinsters who were in town for a few days at most. It helped prevent her from thinking of Arabella's other assets, which distracted her eye far too often for comfort. Her lush bosom, peeking above the neckline of her muslin evening dresses, her full bottom, which often pressed close to her own on benches and picnic blankets, her curved lips, overlarge and meant for kissing. Caroline poured the tea with a little more force than necessary. "I brought you a book from the library," Arabella announced, the same as she did every Wednesday. She set her reticule on the table and fished out a slender novel from its depths, spilling a trail of ginger comfits along with it. She thrust the book at Caroline, accepted a cup of tea in return, and sat down in a rickety wooden chair that she knew from long experience exactly how to balance against the table at the right angle to stabilize it. It's the very newest Inverleigh has to offer, scarcely 2 months behind London this time. She beamed and pushed her wire-framed spectacles up the bridge of her nose. She really was adorable. "Thanks, Belle. I appreciate you going to the trouble." Caroline didn't have time for novels or money for a subscription to the lending library, but she couldn't help squeezing in moments of reading here and there among the chaos that was the Reeve household, and Arabella knew it. It was no trouble at all. Arabella sipped her tea and rebalanced the chair. "I picked up a new book on painting techniques for myself." Arabella sold watercolor landscapes to the visitors that swarmed the seaside each summer. Inverleigh made for pretty pictures, with its dramatic cliffs and walks, its shimmering seas and sandy shores, and its quaint village life that charmed Londoners out of coin every year. Caroline frowned. Most of the coins Arabella earned ended up in her brother's pocket. "Is Matthew going to stay out of it then?" she asked, scowling down at the book. "I might talk to him." Arabella's pretty face was full of the clouds that her head was usually immersed in, and Caroline hated the doubts that chased away Arabella's good humor. "You do that," she said. "And if he doesn't listen to you, then I'll come over and set him to rights." Arabella laughed, her face clearing. "I know you would, but I wouldn't ask it of you. You have too many family troubles of your own to handle mine as well." Caroline had to acknowledge the truth of it. She always had her hands full of Reeve problems. Arabella scooped up her reticule. "Well, I should be going. Shall we walk together to the Martins' dinner party tomorrow evening?" "I should like nothing better. Betsy and Susan promised to stay home and watch the young ones, and I've been looking forward to a free evening for ages." Caroline loved her brothers and sisters, and felt a fierce responsibility for their health and happiness, no more so than if they'd been her own children. She had borne the responsibility of them since she had been 18, 9 years ago now. She had no regrets. Sometimes, though, in a quiet moment before falling asleep, Caroline wished for more opportunity for frivolity and leisure, more money, more family to help her shoulder the responsibility. But they had no aunts or uncles or cousins. It was one reason she was so grateful for Arabella, and why she would never act on her attraction to her. It wasn't worth risking the friendship of the most important person in her life outside her family. She pushed those thoughts aside, like her admiration for Arabella's curves. Neither had a place in her life. She was dedicated to her family, and everything else was a distraction that she could no more afford than the joint of beef for dinner. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Our third reader is a great friend of mine. Peter Dube is the author. Let's give him a round of applause as he comes up. Peter Dube. Peter Dube is the author, co-author, or editor of a dozen books of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And his most recent work, The Headless Man, which we'll be reading from this afternoon, was shortlisted for both the A.M. Klein Prize and the Relit Award. So, Peter, you've meant a lot to me in my career as a writer, And, not many people know this, but like actually before my first book got published, Peter was my mentor, and I've learned so much from him. And I would like you to maybe talk a bit about like your writing community. What's your writing community like? What's your support system?
Career path. I did the formal creative writing degree, and so the beginnings of my writing community lie there. And then I sort of began to publish just after that brief golden moment when large publishers thought gay fiction might be commercially viable. And so, I missed the boat on that, but I met a lot of people. And since then, my own interest in surrealism has put me in touch with the contemporary surrealist movement internationally. And so it's odd. When The Headless Man came out, my publisher phoned me and said, "Dude, you have a lot of readers in the UK." And I'm like, yeah, I know who they are. So yeah, my writing community is largely one that is both local and virtual, to a sense. People I know, by and large, but not people, sadly, that I get to spend as much time with as I do with you, happily.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to leave it to you, Peter.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to hearing you read.
It's lovely to see so many of you. My thanks, of course, to my brother, Chris, and to the good folks at Fierté Littéraire for organizing this event. It's good to be back at the Violet Hour. I can't tell you how good it is to be back. So this book is a hybrid kind of thing, as I am wont to do. I call it a novel in prose poems. So it's a kind of a mix of those approaches. And it all turns around a figure who has no head, hence the title. And this headless man very quickly became for me an image, if you will, of a liberated, fully embodied life. Because you got no head, you live in the body. You got no head, you don't have that super ego yelling at you all the time either. And so it follows him from his birth until a moment of self-realization. And I'm just going to read the first few moments for you of his existence, as it were. So thus, this, my friends, is the birth of the headless man. When the noise of his birth subsided, the headless man woke to life. And so our tale begins with a lie. The truth is, at this point, it would not be entirely fair to name him headless. His head lay at his side, eyes blinking into wakefulness with him. Still, he did stir. He found his feet and stretched his arms above him, past the point where his head would have rested. Were he a natural thing? But he is not. Rearranging all the images of his intrauterine fantasia, he stretches again, discounting the blank spaces around him. On the river, slight silver boats sail against the wind, and the birds sit and sing around him, happy because something is about to happen. And it does. The headless man takes up his head. He knows the day is about to begin, and he is eager to be on with it. With the fingers of his free hand, he closes his eyelids. He hides his head among the roots of the tree, in whose tangle his first memories are trapped, tumbling. So you got no head, you got to find other ways to interact with the world. So this is the headless man learns to see. Being headless, the man had returned his head to nature, after all. He is equally without eyes. Coming to this awareness And realizing the power of his curiosity, the headless man finds this a problem. He sits on a rock overlooking the road to the city and wonders, there is something out there, he knows, something marvelous, something that can change him, something that will unlock locks, sting, make him cry, shatter silence, transform metals into artifacts, sow fields, tell stories, spread plagues, and heal them, help strangers, hurt friends, do the reverse, climb tall things, sing, learn, undo, something that matters, and something that matters to him. Yearning, the headless man reaches out for the empty space before him, spreads his fingers, flexes them. He wants what is in the world and wants the world alike. Then, because in the marriage of touch and longing, things reveal themselves to us. The headless man begins to see. Now, seeing is good, but it's only part of sensual experience, isn't it? So this is the headless man hears. For a long while, the headless man stays where he is, in silence. Not a sound rises from him, nor does any sound disturb him. Everything is timeless, unpunctuated, free of texture. Without any points of comparison, it takes time to understand that such continuity is a kind of incompleteness. What is not responded to, what is undisturbed, has no content. Holding his fingers to the sky, he measures the passage of the sun across its expanse. Fingers fluttering, he watches the moon change shape. But having no ears, he does not count these things as rhythm. The headless man waves at the world. Sun, sun, and moon again, over and over. Time passes unmeasured for him, and yet he knows there is more to all this than image. More than the delight and dazzle, the dimness and the fading out of form, the vanishing outlines of bodies in mist and twilight, the patterns marked out by the expansion of the tree's shadow as the day wears on, the V of flying birds, the spray of water throwing itself at land. And then something stirs in his entrails. A movement that shakes his flesh and skin. Had he a word for it, he might call it rumble. The headless man is hungry, and his body speaks to him. Fill me, it says. Move me anon. Give me something to wrestle with. The sound inside of him is limited thunder, the hiss of the tide, mountains turning over in their sleep. His belly makes sound to match the movement of the world. And the headless man, deep in his guts, begins to hear. This is noise, he thinks. This is the beginning of knowledge. Thank you. And so that's how it begins. And from this point, my headless man will continue his adventures. He will find the city. We all got to find the city at some point. He will encounter the glitter of neon. He will take part in his first riot. And eventually he will find his way to the local leather bar and have a massive mystical revelation in the back room, you know, as one does in those places. I mean, what the hell is more magical than a leather bar's back room? But I'll leave that to y'all to discover when you read the book. And thank you again for your kindness. Have a great one.
Thank you, Peter. Always a delight to hear you read. We do actually have copies of The Headless Man over at my table, which is right near the door over there. Our next reader is Russell Brooks. Come on up, Russell. Give him a round of applause. Russell is a former Canadian track and field team sprinter who competed internationally in the 100 meter, the 200 meter, and the 4x 100 meter relay. His Barbadian heritage, in addition to his biology degree from Indiana University and a career in insurance and finance, helped him write Pandora's Succession, Chill Run, and the Demeter Code, which all have culturally diverse characters and have earned top spots on Amazon's bestseller list. He is currently working on Jam Run, an LGBTQ-themed crime thriller that takes place in Jamaica, and is the sequel to Chill Run. And Russell currently lives in Montreal. So Russell, I'm kind of curious if you could talk maybe a bit about your community. I know that you just came back from Jamaica and you were there to kind of do some research for the book. What was it like to kind of be there and interacting with people that have been helping you, I guess, kind of do a lot of the research for the book?
Okay. Yes. The trip to Jamaica, I spent 2 weeks there. It was much needed vacation, but I took advantage of also visiting all the locations where my current story takes place. And for me, it was important to visit Montego Bay and the surrounding areas is because, yeah, I can do all the research from home and talk to people who live there who can give me feedback on the content, but it's so much different to actually be there and feel the environment, feel what it's like to visit every neighborhood, because a few things I did learn is that a few of the neighborhoods that I visited that take place in the story are very, very rough neighborhoods that you don't want to be walking around at night, especially if you're a foreigner. And they have police checkpoints. They're not just police checkpoints, but even checkpoints with the army, because there was recently a state of emergency, not a state of emergency, but there was a lockdown because of increased gang violence in certain parishes. So just visiting those areas, and okay, I saw how most of the people I met there, practically all of them, are very, very friendly and very welcoming, and those are things I helped to incorporate into the story. But also the rough neighborhoods, I didn't realize how rough they were until I was actually there. And the level of apprehension I had being in those areas, I said, okay, look, this is good because I can actually incorporate what I felt into the characters, like the main character, Eddie Barrow, who was visiting Jamaica for the first time, because he's a published author, and he went there for a book signing for his new release, when it just so happens that he was at a party. He was at a party with his best friend on the first night, and they witnessed a murder. And party for at least 200, 300 people in attendance, and no one saw what happened, and he's the only one that witnessed it. So, yeah, so these are things that I was able to incorporate into the story. The whole feel of the dance party, his apprehension of being in this rough neighborhood. He's worried that a gunshot, someone may start firing a gun at any moment and everything. He's wondering why. He's telling his friend, "Why did you bring me to such dangerous place for?" And he said, "Well, look, if you want to see the real Jamaica, you have to go to the real Jamaica, not the tourist areas." So that's these were all the things I learned, and I was able to make the necessary corrections and modifications to improve the story, to make it a lot more realistic. And I always keep in mind that when I'm writing, I'm not just writing for the average person, I'm also writing for specialists. And in this case, I expect the story to be read in the Caribbean, or for those who've actually been to Jamaica or Montego Bay area, it's important for me to be as accurate as possible, because the ones who've actually been to Jamaica are the specialists. They're the first ones who will spot your mistakes. So I want to be as accurate as possible.
Yeah, it's really important to do the research.
Yeah.
All right, looking forward to hearing you read.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris, and merci beaucoup à tout le monde qui travaille pour Fierté littéraire for giving me this opportunity. When Chris asked me to read an excerpt, I decided to read an excerpt from Jam Run. I had to find something that was under 10 minutes, and it was very difficult for me to find something that did not reveal any spoilers, but at the same time that would fit the time limit. So I found a spot from I decided to take an excerpt from chapter 3. This doesn't involve the protagonist, Eddie Barrow. This chapter actually is about, this chapter features the villains of the story. So I'm just going to read through it, and you can actually read chapter 1 by visiting my website, russellparkway.com. So, chapter 3, Coral Reef Village and Suites Resort, Montego Bay. Vincent Lee Squires had been in love with Jamaica ever since Penn Steel held the first conference. These yearly events were retreats that served to award the company's top salespersons. He recalled when he started on the plant floor 30 years before, becoming the company's executive vice president, a position he held for the past 8 years. Today, he had managerial control over the Braddock, Pennsylvania-based company, which traded on the New York Stock Exchange for the past 5 years. Last year, under Squires' leadership, it became the third largest steelmaker in the United States. He was also instrumental in bringing the company back to the same resort each year. There was an endless supply of booze, multiple swimming pools, jet ski rentals, and even parasailing activities. This was topped off with a breathtaking ocean view and white sandy beaches that went on for miles. As a ritual, Vincent woke up around 6:30 in the morning to do his daily run, the beach being his preferred location. It wasn't the most straightforward task, as the sand made for extra resistance, the equivalent of running with ankle weights, but it beat running indoors on a treadmill on a rainy day. Sure, there was a fully equipped indoor gym, but he could always wait until he got back home to work out indoors. He was near the end of his run when he checked his iWatch. His heart rate had slowed down. Squires' run was 3 minutes slower than when he had first arrived a week ago with his wife and daughter for their annual after New Year's family trip. While they flew back home 2 days before he stayed, as the conference was in the exact location. Damn, he mumbled. The stress over an incident 3 nights ago was still eating away at him. And even though his attorney helped settle the problem, he still couldn't get it out of his mind. Thank God his wife and daughter weren't around. Squires walked away from the sand and onto a stone pathway through the bush. A security guard he knew as Calvin greeted him. As Squires continued walking, 3 women were on their daily routine of sweeping away fallen palm leaves. One after the next, they nodded, speaking a predictable refrain, chanting, "Good morning, Mr. Squires," as he passed them. Sure, the average guest got the good morning or good afternoon greetings, but he got the personalized greeting. Of course, they were pandering for tips, gifts, or both. Unlike the central building, he had more privacy in a separate gated home or villa, which he stood outside of, while he kicked off his beach shoes, then shook out the sand. He then swiped the key card against the door sensor and let himself in. All he wanted was to lie down across his bed and catch a few Z's until it was time to eat breakfast. That thought disappeared once he saw that one of the oak double doors at the back was wide open. He knew he didn't leave any doors unlocked when he left. The first thing that came to mind was to find the nearest object he can use as a weapon. "Relax, Vincent. Come out and join us." The word startled him. It was a woman's voice, not one that he knew. The fact that she knew his name didn't sit well with him either. And her accent did not sound Jamaican. It sounded American. Then again, She may have dropped her accent for his benefit. The second oak door was pulled open from outside, revealing a black woman sitting with her legs crossed at the table where he usually ate breakfast. She could have passed for being in her mid to late 50s, but it was her jaw-dropping, bare shoulder, ruffled cream-colored top that demonstrated that she was a woman of high authority, not to mention how the color of her blouse accentuated her toned, dark arms. Her legs, however, were hidden under the matching wide-legged pants and flat sandals. If there were a clone produced from the genes of Alfred Woodard and Viola Davis, it would be her. Standing next to her was a much younger, athletic man, dressed in an unbuttoned blue polo with beige slacks. His arms were crossed, while he leaned against one of the pillars that supported the edge of the roof that hung over the patio. He must be the muscle. Squire sensed movement to his right, which almost startled him. He looked there and saw a young henchwoman, around the same age as the muscle outside, sitting near the bottom of the staircase. Squires turned back to the older woman. "Who are you? Who let you in?" The brother grabbed the back of the basket-weave chair and dragged it from under the table. The woman narrowed her gaze. "Take a seat, Vincent." The icy tone in her voice made his throat go dry. He swallowed and turned to the creaking sound from the stairs as the henchwoman stood. Without taking her eyes off him, she nodded towards her partners. He glanced back and forth between the henchman and the henchwoman. It was as though they dared him not to comply. Seeing that he did not have a choice, he went out to the patio. The male muscle did not release the back of the chair until Squires was seated. "Tell me, Vincent, does running every morning help you clear your head?" asked the woman as she scooped out the tea bag with her spoon. "It helps somewhat." He studied her. He still wanted to know who they were, but he had the feeling that it would anger them if he were to ask. Squires didn't want to test their patience, especially the hired muscle. The male who stared at him while leaning against the pillar, his arms still crossed, with a fixed gaze. "You must have many questions." The woman took a sip of her tea. "I hope you don't mind. You didn't have any tea, so I brought my own." Squires looked at her. "Are you going to tell me what this is all about?" "Oh, I just wanted to pay you a visit so that you could have a chance to meet the ones who cleaned up your mess." "Mess? What mess?" The woman gave him a shady glance. "Don't be coy with me, Vincent." Squires noticed that she paused, maybe to give him a chance to think about what she said. The woman sighed. "You need to do a better job choosing whose panties you get into." His hand shot to his mouth as he sat back in his chair and crossed his leg while looking away. "You didn't think anyone else would find out, did you, Vincent?" "What did you do?" "Your partner didn't think that your way of handling things would keep your secrets airtight. That's why we're here, to clean up your mess permanently." Vincent looked at her. You killed?" "We had a job to do, and we did it. You ought to show a bit more gratitude," the woman said as she drank the last of her tea. "Oh, my God." Don't worry, Vincent. It will blow over soon." "Really? Murder isn't something that I can forget, and that's not something that just blows over." The woman chuckled. "The police have way too many murder cases to solve at this point. They won't have the resources left over for this case, considering who the victim is." Squire sighed and shook his head. "I didn't want any of this." "Well then," said the woman, "you should have chosen a better hobby. And if you don't want the situation to get any worse, I suggest you keep your hands to yourself and your pants on. Do I make myself clear?" Squires hesitated for a bit. Then he nodded. "Good." The woman smiled as she then stood. "I'm glad that we understand each other." Okay. So that's my spoiler-free excerpt of Jam Run, which will be out on March 31st. And you can stop by my table. You can get the the first book in the series, Chill Run, and I also have 2 books of my other series, of the Ridley Fox Nita Paris series. That's an international espionage series, and I'm even selling the ebook version. So if you enjoy suspense thrillers with conspiracies, martial arts, sex, betrayal, and revenge, please stop by my table. You don't need to look any further. Thank you.
So I always love to hear people read their work. You did an amazing job there. Very, a lot of emotion. I love it. We still have a couple more minutes, so I thought I would read. I wasn't going to read, but I'm here. You're here. I'm going to read from Geography of Pluto. My last book, The Family Way, came out 2021, and I've been really kind of reading that most of the time. But I thought I'd take a trip down memory lane. This is a book about first loves. My main character is a man named Will who has his heart broken for the first time, and so the book's kind of a bit about that. It takes place in Montreal one winter, and it's the relationship between an Anglophone and a Francophone. So I'm just going to read a short passage where they meet. I met Max in October 2004 at a Halloween party in the Mile End. I had stumbled in late along with Angie, Carol, and Izzo. We had been to a screening of the Rocky Horror Picture Show at the Rialto, rice buried deep in our hair. Angie and I had gone as 2 Transylvanian partygoers, dressed in matching suits with funny eyewear and pointed party hats. "Are you one of the Pet Shop Boys?" a handsome man in a plaid shirt asked me out of nowhere. He was dressed as a cowboy, curly blonde wig under a cheap straw hat, and a flower-shaped gift tag around his right wrist that spelled out, "For Harold." "No," I said, taking a look at what we were wearing, but I suppose we could be. My friend and I are transvestites from the planet Transsexual Transylvania, the Rocky Horror Picture Show. "Of course," the cowboy said. "Were you just at a screening?" I removed my hat and rubbed my scalp to answer his question, grains of rice raining onto the floor. He laughed. "It must have been wild." "It was," I said, putting the tiny hat back on. I took the tag around his wrist in my hand and looked it over. "For Harold. Are you the cowboy from the Boys in the Band?" "Very good," he said, impressed. "Almost no one I know has seen it." "Well, it's not the most upbeat of films," I said. "That doesn't mean it still can't be great. Some of the best stories are tragic ones. I think The Boys in the Band is my favorite movie. I've seen it 100 times. "Really? A Francophone whose favorite film is The Boys in the Band," I said with a nod. "I think I like that." He smiled and took a swig from his beer, a handsome ranch hand taking 5. "So you can tell that I'm a Francophone." "Well, you have a bit of an accent," I said. "Damn," he said, looking down. "I was hoping it wasn't noticeable. I've been auditioning for roles in English." "An actor," I thought. "It's slight," I said to ease his worry. "Hardly noticeable, adorable even." He smiled again, and so did I. Suddenly, I felt something under my foot. A grain of rice had made its way down into the sole of my shoe. "Hold on," I said, taking off my sneaker and removing the offending crumb. "God, I'm just covered in rice." "Don't worry," he said. "I'm sure they'll all come falling out once you get home and take off your clothes." I almost lost my balance putting my shoe back on. What the cowboy had said sent a silent surge through my body. He had undressed me in a sentence, and it felt like I had fallen 10 feet. "I'm Max," he said, extending his hand with the gift tag on it. "Hi, Max," I said, shaking back. "I'm Harold." It's a wonder that Max and I had never met before. We knew the same people, hung out at the same places. I might have seen him 100 times before, on the streets or in the bars, but if I had never noticed him. Max didn't stand out the way that the others do, the tall and beautiful who trot about the bars like fresh young ponies out of the gate, nor like the worn and muscular apes who swing topless from speaker to speaker. His beauty was so subtle, so unobtrusive, that he blended into the surroundings like a gecko, lithe and colorful, yet modest and discreet. Max had short brown hair that was thick yet receding, with deep blue eyes that were as vibrant as Neptune. He was of average age, height and build, with furry arms and thick fingers. During the two uninterrupted hours that we got to know each other, I could not stop staring at his hands, the way they held the beer bottle and swept the synthetic hair from his face. As the party wore down, Max asked me if I wanted to leave. We took a cab to his apartment, our hats and accessories off and in bags. We got out a block before his building so he could pick up some milk from the couche-tard. His street was dark and quiet. It had rained that afternoon, so the fallen leaves were clumped together, their earthy mustiness sent airborne by our sneakers. He was telling me about his leaving his hometown of Drummondville at 18. My mother died when I was young, and I never got along with my father. He remarried when I was 12, had 2 more kids, and then forgot all about me. When I came out, he freaked, tried to get me to see a psychologist, wouldn't leave me alone with my brother or sister. After a while, I couldn't take it. I needed to leave, so I saved up some money and left for good. Just packed up one day while they were out and took the bus to Montreal. I muttered my wide-eyed, sympathetic disbelief. Shit. I had heard this kind of story before, but Max was the first person I had met who had lived it. I can't imagine what that must have been like. Have you spoken to them since? No, he continued, matter of fact, as if he had told this story 100 times. I haven't spoken to my father in 6 years, but believe me, it's for the best. I don't need that kind of bullshit in my life. He stopped in front of the red brick building and took out his keys. We're here. Max jingled the keys into the lock, turning it with a loud snap. The door creak opened, and he led me upstairs in the dark, the bluster of our feet accompanying us up to his second-floor apartment. He then opened the door to his home, and it took a couple of blind steps to where he knew the lamp was. With a click, the room lit up, and I became introduced to the life and color of his walls. Bienvenue, he said, taking off his coat and shoes and throwing his bag on a table nearby. You can put your stuff on the hook behind the door. I closed the door and did what I was told. I took off my shoes and left them next to his, wading into the center of the living room to have a look around. Max's apartment was larger than mine. He had 2 more rooms than I did, with a balcony in both the front and the back. Across the vacant lot behind his place was a strip club frequented by an East End biker gang. On future summer nights, when I would often find myself awakened by the odd noise, the crash of a beer bottle against the pavement, or the drunken squeal of a stripper getting into someone's car. Below and to the right of him, the apartments were empty, and on freezing mornings, Max and I would break into them to turn on the heat because his floor was cold. It was easy to do. Lousy locks were hitched up on all of the building's back doors. With little effort, one could walk up the spiraling metal staircase onto his back porch and, with a screwdriver, knock the hook off the latch and let oneself in. Not that Max had anything valuable to steal. All he had was a shitty VCR and maybe 30 CDs. He had no couches either, just 2 futons that turned into beds when old friends would visit from Drummondville. His television only received 3 channels, all in French, and his VCR was missing several buttons. He had lost the remote control, so in order to watch a video, we'd have to take a chopstick out of the kitchen drawer and insert it into the hole where the play button once was. Nothing seemed to work well in the apartment. There was also a clock over Max's sink that was perpetually 4:37. There were no batteries in it. Max hated the ticking sound, so he'd taken them out, but he left the clock on the wall. It became an apt metaphor for how I felt when I was there. Time stood still. Minutes would turn into hours, the lost time replaced by music and sex. And then I would look out into the window, surprised to find that morning had arrived. Thank you. Merci. All right, that's the Violet Hour. Let's give a big round of applause to our readers, Michael Belcher, Jane Walsh, Russell Brooks, and Peter Dube. Merci encore au Denis Martin, Claude, and l'équipe de Fierté Littéraire. Thank you also, Brooke, for the interpretation. Peter, Russell, and myself all have books for sale, so come see us. And if you want more information about Violet Hour events, including the book club, please sign up to my newsletter. Thank you.
Ah, tu fais le signe en français aussi? Non, OK. Tu m'as étonné. Hey, bravo en passant.
Brooke,
Ouais.
veux-tu venir entre nous? Do you want to come between us for a few seconds? Yeah. No, well, if you want to interpret, we want to thank you, for the great job you did. We observed, we don't know the language, but we understood your signing, so it was beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Oui. Okay. Puis, on a notre interprète en langage des signes québécois qui va se joindre à nous. On veut remercier et féliciter Serge Martel qui a fait les 2 jours aujourd'hui et hier pour son magnifique travail. Puis on l'a fait travailler fort parce qu'on recevait des textes au fur et à mesure, puis on lui envoyait.
Ah oui. Mais tu sais pourquoi, hein? Il n'y a pas plus... Ah, vous n'êtes pas disciplinés, les auteurs, les autrices, les auteurs. On recevait les textes à la dernière minute. Ah, mes petits vilains, vilaines. C'est pas grave. On vous aime pareil. Puis je pense que Serge vous aime aussi. Oh, oui.
Oui.
Est-ce que tu me permets, je voudrais faire un beau remerciement. D'abord, moi, j'ai aimé mon week-end. J'ai appris plein de choses ce week-end. Tu sais, on disait que queer, ça rime avec lire, mais j'ai compris que queer, ça rime avec plein d'autres affaires. Puis là, je vais me permettre de faire des rimes qui ne riment pas. Donc, queer, ça rime avec l'imaginaire, la science-fiction, la fantasy, les heures du conte, les mangas. Et on a découvert toutes sortes d'espèces extraordinaires, même dans Violet Tower, parce que j'ai entendu Chris qui parlait d'une relation. Tu sais, on a eu des relations entre différentes espèces. C'est des nerds, je ne sais plus trop quoi, des blobs. Et même entre francophones et anglophones. Ah, ça, c'est des espèces spéciales, ça. Et j'ai appris bien des affaires aussi. Il y a beaucoup de jeunes ici qui ont appris des choses très importantes de leur histoire. Le VCR, les VHS, les bêtas, les disques, les machines à écrire. En tout cas, c'est vraiment le fun. On vous a appris bien de l'histoire. Merci beaucoup.
Moi, je vais commencer par remercier des personnes. La première personne à remercier, c'est Denis Martin-Chabot, qui est l'âme de Fierté littéraire. Depuis 2012 qu'il fait ça. Moi, je suis embarqué dans le jeu en 2019. Alors, il a porté ça, il y a des grands bras au moins, là, sur les bras, pendant plusieurs années avant qu'on devienne un OBNL. Continuer dans le remerciement des personnes, je tiens à remercier Luc Arsenault, qui a fait aujourd'hui les transitions, mais qui a fait la direction de plateau de main de maître. Alors, merci, Luc. On fait du bruit, comme diraient les drag queens, on fait du bruit pour Luc. J'aimerais remercier Jennifer Ricard, qui est une bibliothécaire à la Bibliothèque et Archives nationales du Québec et aussi vice-présidente et trésorière de Fierté littéraire, pour avoir animé 2 panels, dont un peu au pied levé, parce qu'il y a eu un décès dans une famille et elle a repris ça de main de maître. Ou de maîtresse, on dit-tu? Mais bravo, Jennifer, et merci beaucoup. On a toute une équipe de bénévoles à remercier. 2 Pierre, Boisvert et Perrault, 2 Camille, Dupré et Migneux. Oui. Ali Gentile, Philippe Moutillet, Christiane Chiasson, Angélique Rabusseau, et j'ai fait le tour. Alors, merci à tout le monde qui a fait du bénévolat pour nous, parce que sinon, ce serait très difficile, les budgets étant ce qu'ils sont. On va passer maintenant à des remerciements un petit peu plus institutionnels, si on veut. Notre commanditaire principal, c'est le Conseil des arts de Montréal, qui a financé la plus grande partie. On les remercie. Et on a eu, en plus de la subvention générale, on a eu la subvention pour le langage des signes, une subvention spéciale d'accessibilité. Donc, ça fait partie, l'inclusion fait partie de notre mission. Notre partenaire médiatique, Fugue, donc on les applaudit, ils nous soutiennent. La maison d'édition partenaire, dont la table est là, qui publie tous nos recueils, c'est les éditions TNT. Alors, merci à eux et elles. Le Théâtre de la Comédie de Montréal, qui nous accueille pour beaucoup d'événements. Et,
qui nous endure aussi.
Il nous endure aussi, puis il nous chicane des fois. Mais c'est de bonne guerre. Mais merci beaucoup. Vous voyez, le lieu est magnifique. Puis venez à leur spectacle. On a un commanditaire qui nous a fait une petite commandite, mais toutes les commandites sont appréciées. C'est Conseil Impact Social, Social Impact Consulting, un organisme de consultation pour OBNL, comme nous.
Ouais.
Oui, ça mérite.
Puis elle nous regarde, alors merci Marlo.
Merci Marlo, oui. TCF TV, TCF Vidéo, notre diffuseur, monteur, metteur en ondes, bravo. La librairie Le Guélion, qui est notre partenaire ici, vraiment, c'est une coopérative et qui fait beaucoup de services à la communauté. Ils sont en ligne, mais ils sont aussi métro Baudry, sur la rue Baudry, juste de billets derrière la station de métro. Et je tiens à faire un remerciement spécial, même s'ils ne sont pas impliqués dans l'événement ici aujourd'hui. Fierté Montréal croit en nous depuis 2012 et continue à croire en nous. Alors, un gros merci à Fierté Montréal.
J'ai même cru voir quelqu'un de Fierté Montréal de loin, mais avec mes lunettes, là, c'est pas...
Ils sont rendus là-bas.
Ils sont rendus là-bas.
Oui.
Merci, Guillaume.
Oui. Et...
moi, j'aimerais te remercier, Claude, parce que Fierté littéraire est devenu un incontournable. On va se vanter un peu. On est devenu un incontournable dans la littérature queer francophone. On est regardé quand on diffuse en ligne. C'est un peu pour ça qu'on diffuse. On est regardé partout. Il y a des gens qui nous suivent en Europe, en Afrique, ailleurs au Canada. Et il y a des gens qui nous suivent aussi de chez eux parce que c'est des fois un enjeu de mobilité, c'est des fois un enjeu de sécurité. Il y a des gens qui ne sont pas prêts à être identifiés. C'est parfois aussi un enjeu de santé. Alors, on remercie. Si tout ça existe, c'est parce qu'à un moment donné, j'ai dit « À l'aide, peux-tu m'aider, Claude? Je n'arrive plus. » Puis on est devenu... Je pense qu'on a eu un gros organisme. Ouais. Et ça démontre qu'on a besoin de ce genre d'espace bienveillant. J'aime bien dire le mot parce que je sais qu'il y a un groupe médiatique qui n'aime pas ce mot-là. Alors, on est un bel espace, mais bienveillant. Merci à toi. On ne serait pas là si tu n'étais pas là.
Merci. Tu dis merci, toi?
Oui, tu m'as dit merci.
Oui. OK.
C'est fait.
Bon, je te dis merci encore.
OK.
Bien,
merci.
OK.
Alors, il reste... Oui.
Oui, les auteurs, autrices, auteurs sont là jusqu'à 17 h ou autour de 17 h. Vous pouvez faire le tour. Donc, encouragez-les. C'est pour vous, public, que ces personnes se livrent sur papier.
Oh, quel beau jeu de mots.
Et oui. J'y ai même pas pensé, c'est pas volontaire.
Parce que ça t'arrive tout seul comme ça.
Merci beaucoup au public en ligne et parce que la littérature sans lecteur, lectrice, lecteur, ça fait un peu comme lecteur, mais en tout cas, parce que sans vous, il n'y aurait pas de littérature qui se vendrait, puis nos auteurs, autrices, auteurs ne vivraient pas.
Bravo tout le monde, merci.
Merci.